Today, I'm presenting Senate Bill 180, known as the RISE Act, a bill that repeals certain sections of code that mandate additional years of punishment for prior nonviolent drug convictions. Under current law, sentence enhancements can be applied retroactively. 3 years for every prior conviction for possession for sale, or similar drug offenses to any person currently convicted for a similar offense. The original intent of the 3-year sentence enhancement for prior drug convictions was twofold. One, to deter the sale of drugs, and second, to reduce the availability of controlled substances. As we know now, the drug war strategy has failed at decreasing drug availability. Controlled substances are now cheaper, stronger, and typically more widely available. Furthermore, the war on drugs also failed in that it never attempted to address the root societal triggers that contribute to substance use and abuse. What we also know is that sentence enhancements have resulted in overcrowded jails and prisons, unjustly harsh sentences for nonviolent crimes, and crippled state and local budgets. According to the administration, there are currently over 400 enhancements in California statute. This bill, colleague, addresses just one of those enhancements, the additional 3 years for each prior nonviolent drug offense. The research is clear. Longer prison stays alone are not a deterrent and have no effect in the number of drug sellers or the availability of drugs. Longer sentences also have no correlation to the likelihood one will recidivate. We also know that these enhancements have not been evenly applied. In fact, the rates of drug use and sales are comparable along racial lines, yet people of color are far more likely to be stopped, searched, arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and incarcerated for drug law violations than are their white drug-abusing counterparts. Just recently, the Sacramento Bee released an article acknowledging the fact that right here in Sacramento, if you are African American, you are 4 times more likely to be stopped by the police, either in your car or jaywalking down the street. The RISE Act will begin undoing the damage of the failed war on drugs, which was a set of policies rooted in fear and bias. I ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Last week, I attended the annual Peace Officers Memorial, and many of you attended. And in Riverside County, we had 2 horrific fatalities, Leslie Zarudny and Gil Vega. And the Chief of Police of Palm Springs gave the keynote address at the Peace Officers Memorial, and he's basically talked about not watering down public safety laws with initiatives and new laws. I applaud the author for bringing this forward and rightfully being concerned about the civil rights issues, and certainly that's something I think should be addressed. But let's look at some facts. According to the Centers for Disease Control, opioids, prescriptions, and illicit drugs are the main driver of drug overdose deaths. Opioids were involved in 33,091 deaths in 2015, and opioid overdoses have quintupled since 1999. My friends, more Californians die from drug poisoning each year than die in car accidents. More than twice as many Californians die of drug overdoses than are murdered. This bill will essentially eliminate the 3-year enhancements for each prior drug conviction of the following types of crime, unless a juvenile was directly involved in the prior: sale, possession for sale, transport, importation for sale of PCP, possession of the precursors to manufacture PCP, and manufacture of a controlled substance such as methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, etc. This bill seeks to treat career traffickers in the same exact way that an individual is treated for their first offense. This bill eliminates enhanced penalties for the repeat commissions of the most serious drug offenses if the prior did not directly involve a juvenile. But my friends, they do indirectly involve many juveniles who can and will be involved as the beneficiaries of these drugs being trafficked, like in the case of heroin, which we're seeing throughout the United States, which is being counterfeited by fentanyl, which is proven to be deadly, especially here in Sacramento, that had 9 fatalities in just 1 week in 2016, and hundreds of deaths throughout the United States. With the current 3-year enhancements for each prior, it does not ensure that they will serve all the years imposed, but rather can be released early and appropriately monitored. The passage of this bill and the signing of it by the governor will essentially stop the monitoring of these repeat offenders and basically give them a get-out-of-jail-free card. My friends, how many more young lives will be jeopardized? Why would we not want to monitor these dangerous individuals to do all that we can to ensure that they do not return to their very profitable and deadly trade? We're not talking about marijuana here. We're talking about cocaine, rock cocaine, methamphetamine, lysergic acid or LSD, fentanyl, PCP, and other dangerous drugs being manufactured, distributed, and sold, and not making the punishment fit the crime by taking away many of the prison and monitoring consequences to those participating in this potentially ongoing dangerous supply chain of deadly drugs to youngsters experimenting with the same. Passing this bill will certainly increase the distribution of these dangerous drugs, reduce the legal consequences to those involved in the illegal supply chain that are caught, which will increase drug overdose deaths in our state, which I don't think any of us want to see. For these reasons, I respectfully ask for a no vote to save innocent lives and hold those accountable for peddling their poisons on our vulnerable constituents.
Thank you, Senator Stone. Senator Wiener.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of SB 180, and I want to thank Senator Mitchell and the senators from Los Angeles for their leadership on this important criminal justice reform issue. This bill is part of an important process to heal the wounds caused by the failed war on drugs. This war on drugs, which did nothing beneficial for our country, but tore apart families, tore apart communities, exploded our prison population, sucking public resources from things like public education and public universities. It did nothing good but caused tremendous harm. And the fundamental flaw in the war on drugs is that war did not recognize that drug use and drug addiction is a health issue, not a criminal issue, and we should treat it like a health issue. Let's talk about the human cost and the fiscal cost of our current broken system, where people can do long sentences for possessing small amounts of drugs. We heard in committee about from a San Francisco deputy public defender who told us about a 52-year-old African-American man named Michael who was schizophrenic and suffered from a long-term drug addiction. Police believed that they saw Michael selling drugs to another man in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco. But when they searched the other man, they found nothing. On Michael, they found less than 1 gram of heroin, less than 1/4 of a sugar packet of heroin. As a result, he was arrested, charged, and convicted of a drug sale and possession for sale. Ultimately, he was sentenced, because of these enhancements, to 14 years in jail. 14 years. What does that cost a family? What does that cost our state? What does that cost a sick and addicted man who will be 65 years old or thereabouts by the time he's released? where he will probably go onto the streets and be homeless. What does that cost the taxpayer? 1 year in county jail costs about $41,000. 14 years in county jail is over $500,000. 14 years in state prison is almost $1 million. $1 million for a gram of heroin for less than 1/4 of a sugar packet. I'm sorry, but that is absurd. And it is a broken system, and we need to fix it, and this bill will help us do that. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Weiner. Please, no applause. We'll now move on to Senator Nielsen.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, here yet again we reward continuing victimization. And yes, it is victimization. This is not a victimless crime. Purveying drugs absolutely affects thousands of other lives. And you repeat doing it, you get no additional consequence. For one engaged in criminal activity, that is never the signal to quit doing it. That is the invitation to do it more frequently and to escalate your behavior. And of the significance of the crime. Take a look at the streets of your cities. The murders that are so rampant, including gang murders. Underlying a goodly number of those murders will be found drugs. Drugs that have been repeatedly sold. Well, in a mile from our home out in the country, just almost 2 years ago, I heard 4 pops about midnight. I walked outside and I saw a number of red lights coming up. The next morning I talked to the sheriff. To make it short, I said, "Sheriff, drug deal gone bad." Yep. Little tiny rural county, drug deal gone bad. It's happening every city and on the streets many times a week in many cities. And so we're going to encourage it. So we're not going to let any sales to the little children be, oh, that's very good. What about the teenagers? That's the main target of the drug dealers. So it's okay to shove them off and get them into the habit. The young adults. Do they get addicted? Of course they do. Are they victims? Of course they are. Have they made bad judgments? Yep. They've made bad judgments. But now they pay the consequences enduring a lifetime. And as they continue their drug habit, groomed by that drug dealer, whose crime is no big deal, they ruin their young lives and then their adult lives with this drug addiction. We do not win the war on drugs, ladies and gentlemen, by surrendering to the drug dealers. And that's what you're doing, surrendering to the drug dealers. And even the people of California were deceived by Prop 47. Again, they were deceived to think, well, these are no big deals. Well, let me tell you one direct, probably intended consequence, not unintended. The drug courts of California that really worked, and ask your judges. I was a part of starting one of the first one, in fact, up in Butte County, the first drug courts. Your judges will tell you now the drug courts which worked because the offender came into the courtroom periodically with the probation officer and the judge asked for an update. If they were doing well, they would progress off of that track of treatment. If they weren't, they'd go in another door. There would be a consequence. That worked. The judges will attest to that. But now with Prop 47 and this nonsense called flash incarceration, which is no penalty at all, the offender takes the flash incarcerations rather than the governing control of the court to keep them in their treatment so they complete their treatment. The false premise is all of these folks are going to get treatment. They are not going to get treatment. And the perpetrators and the purveyors, they are not going to get treatment. And so you have destroyed a very effective tool in place for decades that was helping win the drug war. Just say no to drug dealers. Don't reward them.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Senator Skinner?
Thank you, Senate President and members. I stand in support of SB 180. And as the chair of both the Public Safety Committee and the Public Safety Budget Committee, I commend the authors for bringing this bill forward to us. We know that enhancements were passed at the height of our mania around increased drug sentencing. Now, at the time, it was motivated by believing that these enhancements and this war on crime, war on drugs, would reduce drug use, reduce drug sales, and overall bring about an increase in public safety. It did not do those things. It did not reduce drug use whatsoever, did not reduce drug sales, and in fact, what it did was just increase the number of people in prison. But it didn't just increase, yes, it increased the total number of people in prison, but it increased a specific population of people in far greater numbers, which the author referred to, and this is in fact the case. Blacks and whites use drugs at about the same percent likelihood amongst the population. 12% of whites use drugs, 12% of blacks. But being black makes you 50% more likely to get arrested and 6 times more likely to go to prison. Now, maybe that's not of great concern to some of us, but let's say what should definitely be of concern: the cost to all of us. The cost is enormous, as other members have already referenced. And as we try to bring down our population of prison and our costs of both prison and county jail, we have got to look at what our sentencing policies have done. Now, I commend both this body and the voters for doing that. We've done that with Prop 47. We've done it with Prop 57. We did it with Prop 36. But now we have this very common sense measure to reduce these enhancements, for which there is no data whatsoever that shows that these enhancements either reduce drug use, reduce drug sales, or improve public safety. So why would we spend the money that we are spending on either county jail or state prison on these folks? Now, additionally, women. Our 2 women's facilities continue to be overcrowded, and we continue to have an increase of women incarcerated in state facilities. What primarily is their charge? Drugs. Many of them with these enhancements. Many times, those drug charges were related to the woman's activity with her partner. There was also domestic violence associated and other things that one could question how much of the woman's activity was really her free will. And yet, we have her incarcerated and are paying the cost of that incarceration because of these enhancements. So I support this bill. It is smart on crime and fiscally responsible, and I urge your support.
Thank you, Senator Skinner. Senator Lara.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I'm proud to stand with my sister in equity and justice and be a joint author on this important bill. You know, I like the way how certain members try to correlate and try to mix message when it comes to the safety of our peace officers, which is important, but to look at what we're trying to really get here and the root of it. You know, I like to talk in direct terms about what this bill means for low-income communities of color, for my fellow Latino, African-American colleagues, and our progressives. You know, last year, Michelle Alexander wrote an editorial in the LA Times in support of repealing these enhancements. Michelle said, and is the author of the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, in which 60% of our prison population are Latino and African Americans. I wonder if these laws will actually still be in place if 60% of white people were incarcerated. So let's take a moment to look at how these archaic racist laws have really impacted people of color. You know, Michelle Alexander calls these types of drug enhancements a tool of community destruction, I should say. In the article she wrote about Teresa Martinez, a resident of Los Angeles, at the time of her last arrest, Ms. Martinez was homeless and struggling to overcome a long cycle of addiction and incarceration. She was on a methadone program but had no money to pay for her medication. Desperate, she returned to petty drug sales. She was busted with the $5 of crack cocaine that she was attempting to sell. $5, members. The base sentence for attempting to sell cocaine is 2, 3, or 4 years. By the standards of most industrialized nations, that is a very harsh sentence for such a small amount of drugs. But because prior convictions, the type of prior convictions that this bill would address, the DA threatened Ms. Martinez with a 9-year sentence. Too poor to bail out, she was stuck in jail, fighting the DA for a fair sentence, which all seem like a recipe for disaster. She agreed to take 6 years in jail for a $5 worth of cocaine, members. That's insane. That is what the opponents of this bill want to defend. A $5 worth of cocaine equals a 6-year stint in jail. We can't defend that. You can't defend the indefensible. More than 80% of the penalties fall on Black and Latino people, even though reports make it very clear that we don't use drugs or sell drugs any more than white people do. It's a pattern of policing, a pattern of charging, and a pattern of overly harsh sentencing that leads to racial disparities in incarceration. It's these types of enhancements and sentences and racially biased patterns of punishment that has created the new Jim Crow and made the United States the most incarcerated country in the world. We need to do a much better job and break this cycle. We need to do our duty as lawmakers and show a little courage to do what's right and not what is politically expedient on the backs of African American and Latinos. To do otherwise is to support a racist policy, plain and simple, a policy that continues to destroy families and communities, a policy that cripples our state and local budgets, and a policy that is unfair to Black and Latino communities throughout the state. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Lara. Senator Bradford?
Thank you, Mr. President. I too rise in strong support of SB 180, and I want to thank the two senators from Los Angeles for this smart, common sense bill that is an important step to scaling back the expensive failure, call it the war on drugs, which really has been a war on minorities and the poor for the last 30 years. If we truly knew our history, the only reason cannabis is a Schedule I drug is because 80 years ago was a way of incarcerating African Americans during Jim Crow laws. This current law adds sentence enhancements resulting in many years of incarceration for drug offenses without any positive effects. These sentence enhancements have not reduced drug use, drug sales, drug-related deaths in the last 30 years since their enhancements were enacted. It's been quite the opposite. Instead, these enhancements destabilize families and communities. Many people who return from incarceration face enormous barriers reintegrating into society. These enhancements raise barriers are even higher when you're a person of color and finding jobs, education, housing. The extreme sentence drains county and state budgets. To incarcerate someone in our prison is $72,000 a year, and as the senator from San Francisco stated, to lock someone up in a county jail costs us roughly $41,000 a year, not including the billions of dollars that we spend over the last decades building prisons and jail cells. County jails are where most of these offenders go because most have no serious or violent priors. if we prioritize our spending on prevention and treatment of drug abuse, our state and local budgets would be greatly benefited from that. Don't fall for the fake news or fake narratives, colleagues. These enhancements don't make our communities any safer, because even with the passage of this bill, our law still would provide punishment for drug sales and manufacturers. The upper penalty without enhancement for drug sales remains 5 years in jail, 7 years for manufacturing even a small amount of a controlled substance. Double that if they have a prior or serious violent offense. If it's a serious case, and if they have caused serious harm, they will be punished severely due to the enhancements that already focus on violence, gang enhancements, or trafficking in large amounts. This bill does not touch any of those enhancements that are currently in place. This is only about non-violent, non-serious, non-prior convictions, which people already have served their time. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Bradford. Senator Bell?
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, as a member of the Budget Subcommittee, I've been looking at a lot of numbers lately and getting a headache, quite frankly, looking at the incarceration numbers. But since I want to give everybody a headache at this point, in support of this bill, I want to read some numbers to you so you get the true picture of why we should pass this bill. First of all, a mental health crisis bed in the state prison system, $345,000 per year. A state mental hospital bed, which is mostly forensic or inmates, $218,000 a year. The cost of an average person in our state prison system, $75,200. The cost of, now get this, the cost of a community mental health bed, putting somebody in a community mental health bed, which has a much higher degree of success in terms of solving drug addiction, mental health. By the way, most of these people are drug addicted, mentally ill, and are frequently arrested over and over because of homelessness or other poverty-induced causes. And the community health bed is $21,900. The marginal cost of a parolee supervision with mental health treatment, which is where we should be, $7,900. So when you look at the cost of incarceration, and you look at the cost of parole supervision with mental health treatment, and the fact that when you're in the community with mental health treatment, you know, Medi-Cal pays for half of the cost, the federal government, excuse me, pays for half of the cost of that. It makes economic sense, and it makes moral sense, and it makes a therapeutic sense to put people that are drug addicted into treatment programs. And what we should not do is we should not give a 3-year enhancement over and over and over and over, getting to the point where it adds up to $75,200 a year. 3 years in the state prison system, $75,000. I mean, over $225,000 right there versus $60,000 for 3 straight years of treatment in a community facility where half the cost would be paid for by the federal government. So why would we not vote for this bill? This is why we have so many in the United States fiscal conservatives arguing for drug treatment as opposed to prison. This is a common, you hear Newt Gingrich and all these other people arguing and standing together for arguing for the same thing that we're arguing for here with this bill. So I urge an aye vote on this. This is a fiscally responsible proposal. It is good policy. And yes, by the way, we should have good policy debated on the floor in the Senate, not through initiatives. Yes, we should do that. We should do our job here in the Senate and address this issue forthright, right here with all our debates, all our policy discussions. Thank you very much. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Any other debate or discussion? Seeing none, Senator Mitchell, would you like to close?
President, I would. Thank you very much. As I listened to some of the debate, first of all, I'm sorry that some of my colleagues who have questions about aspect of the policy needed some clarification didn't pose questions I was prepared to answer. But what did occur to me as I listened to some of the debate was a wish. And I wish I had the luxury to live in a simplistic world of good or bad, where Ozzie went to work and Harriet stayed home and vacuumed with high heel shoes and an apron and received Ozzie's paycheck, and their 2.1 children and the picket fence and their dog, and everyone lived happily ever after. I wish I lived in a world based on 30-year-old experience and data. I wish I lived in a world that completely denies the reality of poverty, race, implicit bias. I wish I had the luxury of hiding behind policy inaccuracies and political pressure perpetrated by the opposition. But alas, I do not, cannot, and will not. Because the people who elected me to represent them in the Senate, the people we've heard from, whose lives have been directly impacted by these failed policies, won't let me. Let me address some of the specific issues raised in the debate. Offenders versus victims. This notion that they're preying on vulnerable victims of substance abuse. I would argue that many of those who get caught up in the war on drug policies are vulnerable victims of substance abuse. They too are victims of the war on drugs. Last year when we discussed a very similar policy, the notion of drug cartel and Miami Vice-esque people and boats and fast cars were raised repeatedly in terms of why we couldn't take a step forward in this policy. Once again, I'll argue when we talk about substance abusers and those who sell drugs, who do you see? I see struggling Californians, many of whom look like me. I don't see men in white suits with no socks and penny loafers and floating speedboats down Crenshaw Boulevard. That's not who I see. So we have a responsibility to develop policy based on the current issues facing Californians today. Law enforcement tools, quote, one of the few tools law enforcement has left, end quote. Well, which tools will this bill take away? These are still felonies. People will go to jail. And they will get enhancements that this bill does not reverse if it's for a serious or a violent offense. These are non-violent offenders we're talking about. And I don't have the luxury of grouping everyone in one big pool and assuming that they are not worthy of treatment, enhancement, and a chance. I don't have that luxury. We talk about a free pass. There is no free pass. If you are arrested and convicted, you will go to jail. Again, unless you have a violent or serious past, then you're going to jail for an extended period of time. So let's be clear about what this bill will do and who will be empowered to make important decisions about sentencing. The idea that the punishment should be based on the current crime and criminal history neglects to acknowledge the power of the judiciary, the court. Judges can already adjust a sentence based on criminal history. People are already prohibited from being given probation only if it's for a second offense. For most felonies, judges have discretion to choose from 3 terms for the base sentence: a lower term, middle term, or upper term. For possession for sale, it's 2, 3, or 4 years, et cetera, et cetera. So if someone has possession for sale of cocaine or sale of cocaine, a judge can give them straight probation the first time. The law already prohibits them from getting straight probation again the second time. So I want to be clear about who we are empowering today to make the best decision on a case-by-case basis, and that's the court system. Current law goes above and beyond the power of the court and issues automatic enhancements, no questions asked. There are 400 enhancements on the books today. The current administration has acknowledged their failing, quite frankly, when they were in leadership, when he was governor, 25 odd years ago. Enhancements came about during a time when we didn't have the research to show that they are not effective and were based on fear. When you know better, you're supposed to do better. And we now have 25+ years of research that shows us that sentence enhancements do nothing except blow up our budget for CDCR and local governments for jails. There is no correlation between sentence enhancements and peace officers' safety in doing their jobs. So to continue to draw that correlation is inappropriate. There is no correlation between sentence enhancements and recidivism. So we can continue down this road, or we can continue down the road of what California voters have asked us to. Colleagues, these are interesting times in which we live to have this conversation about the war on drugs, particularly given a statement made by our federal Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, just last week, when in his capacity as Attorney General, he has decided to roll back a Clinton and Obama-era policy that avoided casting mandatory minimum sentences on low-level and nonviolent drug offenders. So California can decide if we want to push forward in dealing with those who have been victimized by the drug trade, free up state resources to spend on what we know works: drug treatment, education, and opportunity. Or we can go backwards and see if maybe the second or third time around we're more successful by increasing public safety by locking up more people for longer periods of time. It didn't seem to work the last time, so I'm not sure what makes us think it would be a more viable option on a go-forward basis. This bill is a part of a package on equity and justice, where we are using research to look critically at the policies that impact all of California today. With that, I ask for your favorable consideration on Senate Bill 180.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. No. Atkins. Aye. Bates. No. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. No. Bradford. Aye. Cannella. No. De Leon. Dodd. Fuller. No. Gaines. No. Galgiani. Glazer. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hill. Aye. Wesso. Jackson. Aye. Lara. Aye. Leva. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mendoza. Mitchell. Aye. Monning. I. Morlock. Morell. No. Newman. Wynn. Nilsson. No. Pan. I. Porchatino. Roth. Skinner. I. Stern. Stone. No. Vidak. Wykowski. I. Wiener. I. Wilk. No. Win. No.
Secretary, please call the absentees.
De Leon. Dodd. Galgiani. Glazer. Hueso. I. Mendoza. Morlock. Newman. Porchatino. Roth. Stern. Vidak.
Senator Mitchell moves the call. Okay, well, we will now lift the call on file item 20. Secretary, please call the roll.
Dodd. I. Galgiani. Glazer. No. Mendoza. Galgiani. I. Morlock. Porchatino. I. Roth. Stern. Vidak. Newman. I to no.
Ayes 22, noes 13, measure passes.